Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, well, seems like forever. So the last time we were talking about anti-Semitism and Middle Ages, all that stuff. Remember? Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to keep moving on. Now, remember, we're bouncing all over the place, time-wise and location. But there are two major groups and a third subset group of Jews in the world at this point in time. There's the Ashkenazi Jews who've moved into Eastern Europe and Europe, the Sephardic Jews who've moved into Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, and then the Mizrahi Jews they were Sephardic Jews, but didn't get all the way to Spain. They kind of stayed in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. Okay? And we talk about the composition of the Siddur, right? We did talk about that. And that's basically unchanged since the 8th, 9th century. Down. What happens? Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. Where's our charity box? Please forgive me. Someone's got to take the money tonight and give it to some cause. This is the angel of charity blesses us. There's money in here. We didn't take it last time, so someone needs to just take this at the end of the night. Make sure you take it, give it to something not the temple. Okay. So what happens is, especially in the Sephardic world, what's going on in the world is something called Convavencia. It is a unique time period in world history where Islam and Catholicism, because that's all there is for Christianity, and Judaism are interspersed in the same area, and they actually create a flowering. They create this amazing couple of centuries of wisdom and knowledge and mysticism. Okay, that's just beautiful. It's hey there, come on. So it is a special time. Now, what happens in this time period is they play upon each other and start getting wisdom from each other as well. And it's in this time period that we will have ultimately the flowering of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism is going to come out, right? But in this time period, on the one hand, in England, you've got 1144 in Norwich, England. You've got the Blood Libel. But you have some amazing commentators coming out, and they're pretty much all Sephardic. The vast majority of them are Sephardic. They come from a tradition of Spain, Portugal, Italy, France. Yes, pass that. And someone take this to give it to charity. And they start really looking at the commentaries. So they looked at Talmud, they looked at Torah. And you start getting these men that are just amazing. They're awe-inspiring. And they start writing commentaries to explore deeper meanings of verse of Torah. And people look at me and they say, Rabbi, every week you come out with a Torah commentary. Well, that's what rabbis are supposed to do. Okay, when someone's moving to a new town, they say, Rabbi, do you know any rabbis in this town? My answer is no, but you go look on their website or go look up their names and see what they've written. Because then you'll know about them. As Rabbi Shulchan once said to me when I had my book come out, and he said, writing a book is as close to having a baby as a man can do. Because you give it, you put all your work into it, and it goes, and you got no control over it. As I'm currently finding out with 12-year-olds. And forgive me for running a little late. So you have these great commentators. Now here's what happens with these commentators. They end up having nicknames, right? And the nicknames are typically acronyms. So there's a guy named Rabbi Moshe ben Moshe. Ben meaning son, his father is Moshe. Yeah. So he becomes called the Rambam. He's also called Moses Maimonides. We say from Moses Rabbeinu to Moses Maimonides, there was never a Moses like Moses. The Rambam is arguably the greatest scholar that has ever existed in Judaism, arguably the greatest mind that has ever existed. His work is still studied in medical schools. He spent 8 hours a day as the doctor for the Sultan. He spent 8 hours a day treating the poor Persians, they're not Persians, but they're Egyptians actually, poor people around the world. And then he spent 8 hours a day writing Torah commentary. Supposedly he didn't sleep. And if you look at the volumes he has done, it's absolutely believable. So he wrote a book called Mishnah Torah. It's a compendium of volumes. Mishnah Torah meaning the second Torah. He actually says in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah that if you read this, you don't need to read the Torah. And it's still called Shuvot, so all these different laws about how you do what you do, because the Torah doesn't tell us necessarily what to do, how to do it. Talmud goes into it, but then Rambam really starts to explain it. He additionally writes an entire commentary on the Talmud, on the Torah, on the Tanakh. He writes medical journals. He's just this amazing being, and he's called Rambam. As opposed to Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, which is rabbi called Ramban, Nachmanides. His commentaries are more geared towards a little bit more mystical understanding. He's more interested in some of that kind of work. One of my favorites, Rabbeinu Bachya, and you can see when these guys are living, 12th century, 12th, 13th century, 11th, 12th century. Bachya writes, he splits his organization of how he analyzes Torah by looking at it from what we call Pardes, which is the root of the word paradise. It stands for Peshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, 4 different levels of understanding any verse. Peshat being simple, one is not better than the other, they are different. Example. The Peshat level of the verse might be, the rabbi picked up a bottle of water. Okay? The Remez, the little deeper version. The rabbi moved his arms, inhaled and moved his arms so that his bicep closed, extended his tricep, wrapped, is this metatarsal? What are these? I'm not looking to you because I feel metacarpal. His carpal bones, grabbed the water, picked it up, and poured it in. That's a little bit deeper way. Okay. Drash. The rabbi was thirsty because he'd been rushing around. He'd been rushing around because he had been looking after his 12-year-old twins. And so he was a little bit thirsty because he hadn't had much water. And so he decided he was going to pick up and drink the water. The drash, the story. Sod, which means secret. The rabbi's overwhelming value in his life is his love for his twins. This led him to make sure he was taking care of his body. And so he picked up a glass of water. Is any one more or less true than the other? No. Okay? But they each have different meanings. The Sod level really has a mystical meaning to it, doesn't it? It really has this beautiful underline that's about love and things like that. All right. Bachya examines each of the Torah portions, examines the Torah portions, examines the words, the phrases, etc., and he examines them on each of the 4 levels. So he splits it apart by looking, okay, this is the Peshat understanding, this is the Remez understanding, this is the Drash understanding, this is the Sod understanding. Rashi. I have a thing against Rashi. I admit it. I'm owning it. I don't like Rashi. Okay? Most rabbis, vast majority of Orthodox rabbis will tell you that you should have one hand on the Torah and one hand on Rashi's commentary. Rashi stands for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchak. Rashi lives in the 11th century. This is Rashi's commentary on the book of Genesis. Okay? And just so you can get an idea of how much. Okay?
What is it about this commentary that you don't like?
Pretty much everything. Go past that. This is something from Rambam. This is from his Mishnah. I will tell you what so first of all, Rashi is just very, I find him to be dry. I find him to have to miss the experience of the love of God. I'm sure it's there. I just don't find it. I also recognize that one of my problems with Rashi is, and there's a whole theory, by the way, that Rashi is actually written by his 3 daughters.
Yeah.
Great book called Rashi's Daughters. I recommend. Have you read it?
Yeah.
I was thinking I could bring the author. I've known her for years. Should I
Really?
bring her out here?
Oh, that would be great. Yeah,
Oh.
that was a great book.
Rashi's Daughters.
Yeah.
The whole theory that Rashi was not written by Rashi, but written by his daughters. But it still doesn't make me like him. I think the reason I really dislike him the most is because he created his own alphabet. So Rashi actually created different letters for Aleph through Tav. So if you want to study Rashi, you need to learn Rashi Script so you can read it in Rashi Script. I find that it's arrogant and it's unnecessary and it's ludicrous and I don't like it. Plus, I hated trying to
Maybe
read
he
the
was
script.
dyslexic or something.
You know what? I can make a bunch of symbols too and say, you know what? This is now Aleph and this is Bad and this is Gimel. And you know what? But people accept it because he is brilliant.
Well, he is French too, right? So
Yes, he's arrogant. I just don't resonate.
Well, the French
I resonate to Ramban more than Rambam. Yes.
Well, Rabbi, one question.
There's probably that's probably. Let me say it for 1 second, please. That's probably got Rashi Script in it. I don't remember. You can see how often I open this up. It's part of my library because I think I should have it, and maybe my kids will want it. But yeah. So if you look at it, this is the Rashi Script, and if you look at it as you go around, that's not Hebrew. It's kind of similar, but it's not Hebrew. Just the top there on the top left. That's the Rashi Script. So if you want to study, you got to study in Rashi Script. I don't like it. I admit it. I'm prejudiced. I'm entitled to have my stuff. That's kind of my thing. So Rashi is a great commentator, and there's a lot of value to what he says. I just don't resonate. Ramban, I love because he's looking at the Drosh and So level a lot. Ramban also was part of the disputations. So in the 13th century, the Catholic Church decides they're going to have these debates.
Yeah.
And the debates are going to be which religion is better, Catholicism or Judaism. Okay? And this actually happened. And obviously no rabbi won. Oh, the judges, by the way, were 3 bishops.
Yeah.
Okay? There are going to be 3 debates. And they're going to look at these disputations. Ramban had the courage to take them on, and he was not only so good, they viewed it as a draw.
Wow.
Which means he won. Okay. I love Ramban. I love Bachya. I like Maimonides. I'm not a huge Rashi fan. Yes.
There's a myth I've heard. I don't know if it's true or not. That was either Maimonides or Rambam, who was sent by the Egyptian Caliph
Maimonides.
to cure Richard the Lionheart when he was
I don't know if it's true or not. I've heard that too.
I wonder if it's
I don't know if it's
true.
true. Rambam, Maimonides was this great healer and great doctor and great mystic. And people look at him and they think he's very Aristotelian. That he really has that kind of thing.
Right.
He doesn't. If you really look at his work, it actually shows a great deal of understanding. He has a book called The Guide to the Perplexed.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very deep book that is about experiencing and understanding God at a different level.
Almost reads like a Greek narrative, though.
His Mishnah Torah does, but that's why people think he's that way. But I don't. I disagree with that. And the friend who was my advocate for my Orthodox ordination actually did his dissertation on the mysticism of Maimonides.
Huh. Can you still get that?
I'd have to call Aaron. He's in Florida.
Okay.
He was the former chief rabbi of Sweden.
I thought he published or something.
So yeah, I don't know the portion. So, but I actually tend to think he's more than that. But so these commentators start coming around, and we start accepting their commentaries. And they start explaining to us, what does Judaism mean? What does the Torah mean? What does the Bible mean? That's a rabbi's job, to make the Torah, to make Judaism accessible to the people of the time and space where they live. That's our job. It's kind of the official job description. Right. And yet, how often today do we not do that? As opposed to, these men were going out there and they were writing so they could affect more people. Again, you write a book, you never know whose hand is going to get it, ever, right? So these people wrote this amazing work. So we have Torah, then Tanakh, and then Talmud, right? And we start, bless you, and then we start getting these commentaries. And then we have a guy named Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, and he writes a book called the Abarim Turim, the 4 columns. Now, Maimonides refers to the 613 commandments, and it's referred to in Talmud. It doesn't say what they are. The Torah, writes his book with 4 columns based on 4 different categories of law, and he elucidates all 613 laws. Okay? So now we know what are these 613 commandments, what are we supposed to do, and how are we supposed to do them. And Maimonides spends a lot of time on that, but it's still not elucidated so clearly. Then you got this guy in the 14th, and the 15th, and 16th century, a guy named Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he writes the Shulchan Aruch. He bases it on the Torah in terms of having 4 categories, but their categories are different. Okay? And so he creates this Shulchan Aruch, which means the set table. Now, because he's writing in Israel, and because it's also the time of Luria, Kabbalists, and things like that, his gets accepted much more than the Torah. And this Shulchan Aruch then becomes, and it's a little later too, so now by the time we're in the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, you now have this Shulchan Aruch. So you want to know how to do Judaism? You want to know what you're supposed to do? There's the Shulchan Aruch. Look it up. Okay? These guys are telling you what it means. The Shulchan Aruch and the Torah. The Torah, by the way, has gotten more popular in the conservative Jewish movement in the last 20 years. Many people in the conservative movement decided to like this better than Shulchan Aruch. But so you have these commentaries, and this one, though, is really do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. Make sense? And that's where we start getting. So when you want to know what you should do, you can look at Shulchan Aruch. So it's both more specific and more general than what was beforehand with Talmud. Now, my opinion is if you want to know what to do, I kind of bypass that and go back to the source material, Talmud and Bible. Okay. But this is what the majority of the Jewish world then accepts. This is Jewish law. This is the Jewish law. Now, these men also, and they continue, they start writing documents that are called a tshuva, the plural of which is tshuvot. And it means responses. Legal opinions. Now, just like U.S. law is based on past legal opinions, which is based on other legal opinions, which is based on statutes, which is based on the Constitution, which is based on the Magna Carta, or whatever it goes back, right?
Yeah.
The tshuvot are based on other laws. But again, the tshuvot, the responses, legal responses, are for the Jews of that time and place when they're being written. And you have to read them to understand whether or not they make sense. So I'm going to give you an example of a modern tshuva. January of 2021, one of the great Jewish scholars of the world, a man named Rabbi David Golinkin. Have you ever heard of Rabbi Golinkin? Amazing legal mind. The Rabbinical Assembly, which is the Rabbinic Union for Conservative Movement Rabbis, the Rabbinical Assembly asked Golinkin to write a responsa, should we have mandatory vaccinations against COVID? Okay. He writes a responsa which details the arguments, why, what he bases it on, this piece of Talmudic law, this response by someone else, this piece of Torah, etc. And he determines that we should absolutely mandate vaccinations against COVID, and that this is Jewish law. This is his tshuva. It is unanimously adopted by the board of the Rabbinical Assembly, so therefore it is now the law of conservative synagogues nationwide. Okay? Here's the problem. If you read his tshuva, which is brilliant, by the way, it goes into the issues of, like any of these commentators do, he goes into the issues of, if a well had a snake and one person died from it, are you permitted to go? Anyone else allowed to go to the snake, to the water, or do we need to cordon off the entire area? He uses that as an analogy. He uses all sorts of brilliant logic. Here's the problem. If you read his tshuva, and most people don't, they just say the ending is this, and all the rabbis approved it. His tshuva is based, that he says in the very first part of it, based upon the major premise that, and he says this, 100% of doctors agree that we should have mandatory vaccinations. Okay, and that the benefits outweigh the risk. We know that's not true now, and we know it wasn't true in January 2021, was it? If that had ever been true, his argument is perfect.
Yeah.
100% of the doctors said that the vaccinations are more required than the risk. No question, that would have been a good argument. But he bases his entire argument, it's fallacious because it's based on a major premise that simply wasn't true even at the time.
Right.
Best of my knowledge, the conservative movement has not put out a response of disagreement with that, and that's still the official conservative movement position. So you got to actually read these things, and that's why I like going back to the source material, because I find it much more useful, much more beneficial, and I can look at it, and I believe that we can have honest dialogue about things, and not just have to say, "Oh, Shulchan Aruch says this, Rabbi Lincoln said that, therefore we're doing this or that." Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Are you with me so far? So that's what's one thing that's going on in the world at this time. What also happens in the world this time, I don't know the exact dates of this life so that I don't mess that up, because I will otherwise. I'm just not going to remember the exact dates. What also happens at this time, is, what is it? Here we go. Is a man is born, doesn't live a long time. He only lives 38 years. A man who's named, also in the same time period, you see he's living around the same time as Carol, and they're living in the same place. Carol lives in a place called Shabbat. And there's another man named Rabbi Isaac Lurie. Also known as Ha'ari. Ha'ari means the lion. Ari also is an acronym for the Ashkenazi Rabbi Isaac, because he was actually Ashkenazi.
That's
And it means the lion. And Luria reframes Judaism. Okay, so on the one hand, these men are reframing Judaism in terms of law, right? Luria reframes Judaism in a whole other way. So we're going to talk about it because it is extremely important. How many of you have heard of Luria? Okay. So Ha'ari's theology, the Hari of blessed memory. So Luria only lives 38 years, but he is a mystic and he is a master of understanding. So we're going to go back now to the beginning. Okay. From the beginning, there are only two questions in our religion or any other religion. There's really only two questions. How and why did God create the world? How and why does God sustain or maintain the world? Everything else is details. Why did God create the world? How did he do it? Why does God sustain the world? How does he do it? Everything else is just details, isn't it? Right? So from the beginning of Judaism, we have two schools. One called Ma'aseh Bereshit. Ma'aseh means workings. Bereshit means of creation. And one that is called Ma'aseh Merkavah. Again, workings, in this case, of Merkavah, which is the chariot. This is the chariot described in the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel about God's heavenly court. Effectively, how and why did God create the world? How and why did God sustain it? Everyone with me on this? Those are really the only two questions, aren't they? Everything else is just noise. And this because and everything, and Talmud and everything else, we're constantly looking at things through these lenses. Now, we talked a bit in the first week. How many remember the first week? We talked about the word Bereshit. How many of you remember this? No one else remembers this. It's not a problem. We're going to do it right now. This is the word in Hebrew, Bereshit. Okay. It means when it began, in the beginning, how it began creation, always translated as in the beginning, usually translated that way. Except, as Rashi does say, and when he talks about, he spends pages on just this first word. I think it's Rashi. He actually says that. He actually says, he talks about it's there somewhere. This verse says nothing but expound upon me. See, this isn't a real Hebrew word. I'm going to read Hebrew, by the way. Okay, so this is the bet, the resh, the silent, the shin, the yud. Okay, reshi. This is not a real word in Hebrew. It's like saying supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's not a real word. Now, if I say that to you, you know that it's something extreme. Beyond that, you don't know a whole lot, right? So, if we take the word Bereshit, since it's not a real word, there must be a meaning to it. Everyone follow me? The moment I lose you, you need to yell, raise your hand, or throw something at me. All will work. Okay? There's no Torah in this portable ark, seriously. Now, the thing to understand is the last word of the Torah is Yisrael. So the last letter is a lamed. Okay? Now, if you take that lamed and vav, you take the last letter and the first letter. You guys still with me? Yes? No?
Yeah.
It spells the word lev, which means heart. Everyone with me so far? Bet is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. We ask, why doesn't it begin with an aleph? Well, I want you to imagine there is an aleph. It's hiding right here between the last letter of the Torah and the first letter. Okay? Now, what's cool about that is aleph is the only silent letter in the Hebrew alphabet. In ancient Hebrew, ayin was pronounced ayin. So you wouldn't be saying Shema Yisrael, you'd be saying Shema Yisrael, which is why we now pronounce it silent. Anyhow, so imagine that it's a silent place in the middle of the word heart. Everyone with me still? This is a map as to how to create anything in your life that you want. See, if you take the first, second to last, and last letters, they spell the word bayit, which means home or container. You guys got that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? I'm looking at everyone. Okay. If you take the first, second, and third letters, it spells the word bara, which means create. If you take the second, third, and fourth letters, it spells the word rosh, which means head or intellect. If you take the third and fourth letters, it spells aish, which means fire or passion. If you take the third, fourth, and fifth letters, it spells the word ishi, which means my human being. And if you take the last letter, it's tav, which is the last letter, always stands for Torah, which literally means guidelines. Now, this is God giving us a model of how to manifest anything in your life you want. Okay? Anything. First of all, remember I said there's a silent space in the middle of your heart? So you go to the silent place in the middle of your heart. You then create the container that you want to create it, your creation on. You create with your intellect and your passion. In this case, it was a human being, but that which you want to create, and you give it guidelines to live by or exist by. That is the model to manifest anything in the world. You want to create a piece of art. Who's an artist? Okay. What kind of art do you like to do?
Jewelry design.
Okay. So first of all, you go into a silent place in your heart. What you want to create. You want to be creating it. Then you give it a container. It's going to be a bracelet, a ring, a necklace, a pendant, whatever. You create it with your intellect and your passion until it's created, and then you give it the way it needs to be used. And in your case, you're going to give it to someone to wear, or you're going to wear it, or you're going to sell it to someone to wear, or you're going to say this is how it clasps onto you. Right? Isn't that how you create?
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, huh? Doesn't matter what it is. You want to create a piece of art. You want to create a symphony. I want to create a piece of music. I go, my silent place in my heart, I realize, okay, I really need to create some music. I'm going to create it. First, it's going to be a symphony. So now I've decided what I'm going to do. I'm going to create it with my intellect, my passion, and then I'm going to give it all the rules so it can work as a symphony with all the different band members. You want to create a book. Inside your heart, there's a desire. There's no desire in our heart that God did not place there. It doesn't exist. So you want to create a book. Okay? So now you decided that. Now you're saying we want to give these teachings out. You put it out, I want to do it in a book. You create it with your intellect and your passion. Create what you're doing, and you give it guidelines. It's going to be published online. It's going to be published in universities. It's going to be published in commercial press. I'm going to self-publish it, etc. Do you guys see how this manifests? It doesn't matter what it is. Yes, go ahead.
There's things within Hebrew itself. There's a lot of words that are codes.
The whole languages. That's why ultimately you can't study it in English.
I can see why not.
You can if you have a group where you've got someone translating, but it's because
It's subtle. There's a lot of subtleties.
Look, Rashi, it's a great example. Rashi spends pages on just this word Bereshit. Okay? If you're just writing a Bible, so he has that just as, this is his commentary on just the book of Genesis. So his commentary on a whole Bible would take up this whole wall. Who's going to read that?
No.
That's why we study in the Chavruta with friends. Because it also binds us together as friends. Does that make sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Why it's so, yeah.
Why did Hashem make it so complicated?
It's not. Who's it complicated for? Okay, we make it complicated.
Yeah.
Okay? We make it complicated. We make it complicated. First of all, I don't think anyone in this room, Hebrew is not our first language. Okay? Can I erase this?
Yeah.
So we make it complicated like we do so many things. It's all right there in plain sight, but we need to look.
Isn't it everybody's interpretation of?
And everyone, and as long as it's based in legitimate interpretation, based in Torah, it's not off the mark. Everyone can add to the Torah. They can all add to their commentaries and their portion. Absolutely. I'll give you another example. Heal. Okay. They didn't walk. I tried. They wouldn't do it. Okay. So God's name is Yud He Vav He. Right? There's the Yud, He, Vav, and He. Now, every letter in Hebrew is a numerical value, right? Just like in the ancient Roman numbers, right? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. Yud is 10, He is 5, Vav is 6, He is 5. 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5 equals 26. So the numerical value of the word for God's name is 26. There's a word we have, it's called Ahava. And it means love. Aleph is 1, He is 5, Bet is 2, He is 5, equaling 13. And so our sages teach us, when you can experience the love for God, that you have for God and that God has for you, then you understand what God's name is. That's hidden in plain sight, isn't it? Moreover, as long as we've got these many colors I'm going to use. Moreover, every word in Hebrew has a shorish, a root, right? Like many languages. The root of this word are these two letters. They spell the word lihiyot, which means to be or to exist. Okay? If you put a yud in front of a word, it makes it future tense masculine. The word for speak is medaber. If I want to say he will speak, I say yedaber. A hey at the end of a word is past tense feminine. So if I want to say she spoke, Dibra. Okay, you with me? That means God's name is the simultaneous conjugation in both future and past and present in masculine and feminine. It is future, present, past, feminine, and masculine all at once. That's what God's name means. Now, that's right there, isn't it? Is that complicated? Here's what happens. We don't pay attention. The sunset's beautiful. And we have to say thank you. A child is born, it's spectacular. And we have to say thank you. How many of us realize how much God loves us every moment? Every single moment. And do we even deserve it? Think we love our children? Think how much God loves us. So what happens with Luria, okay, is Luria knows all this stuff. Luria's a mystery. And it's not knowing. He has experienced this space, the awareness. Okay? And so what Luria does is he takes the Maaseh Bereshit and he takes the Maaseh Merkavah, these two different schools. Okay? And he takes things from Torah and he takes things from Talmud. And he combines them and integrates them into one theological system of practices and understanding. That becomes known as Lurianic Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Now, you do not hear me referring to Kabbalah. You hear me using the phrase Jewish mysticism constantly. The reason is Jewish mysticism predates Luria by thousands of years. He takes it and he integrates it all together. But when people say, oh, I'm studying Kabbalah, because you were taking a Kabbalah class, right? You were taking a Kabbalah class, and they taught you, here's the Sefirot, these energy centers. Tell you why they're called that? Tell you why those are the names? Bother sharing with you where it comes from, the concept of Sefirot? They just said, this is the truth. And so that's dogma, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't like dogma. Okay? Dogma and I do not get along. If I see dogma, I will try and make a cat knot, even though I don't like cats. Okay? But he does such an amazing job of integrating all this together that people refer to Jewish mysticism as Kabbalah.
Yeah.
The word Kabbalah comes from the Hebrew word lekabel, which means to receive. I cannot learn something if my hands are closed. Okay? My hands must be open for me to receive. So he takes this and he integrates it. The problem is that people teach it. Look, there were rabbis who started teaching me Jewish mysticism right after my birthday. That's 46 years ago. Okay? It's wild. Not a long time. I started teaching at the university Jewish mysticism 25 years ago. Already been doing it for 25. It's not just about learning the words, it's about having an experience of what we call Yehud. Yehud means unification. It is a term that is used to describe what a bride and groom must do immediately upon breaking the glass. They go to their private chamber and they bada bing, bada boom. I'm looking at you too, just so you know. It's a bada bing, bada boom. Hopefully it's a little longer than a bada bing, bada boom. And that's called the unification. It means unification. It's also the description of the experience of meditation and mysticism. We become unified with God. We're always unified with God. We're just not aware of it. We put veils. Our kids are so concerned with whatever else they may be unaware, right? You just went through bar mitzvah with Darius. There may be times when Darius is unaware that you love him more than anything in the universe because of whatever he's going through. Those are veils that he's put up. We do it all the time with God. And different techniques so that we remove those veils and we can have unification. The idea of a bride and a groom is that they're so vulnerable they can be unified. And so we can get to a quality that the Baal Shem Tov calls devakut. Devakut means to cleave. So as opposed to just what God wants is devakut. Instead of us being like this with God and humans, like this, or even like this, what God wants is this. If you look at mystical poetry from any tradition, our traditions, Solomon Ibn Gabi, Rumi, Kabir, Gibran, how many of you are familiar with any of those names? Okay. There's a period where I read Rumi every morning. You've read Rumi?
Yeah.
And that actually inspired me to want to learn Farsi more than anything, because I've read it in all the English translations. Have you ever read Rumi?
Yeah.
Okay. It is, or Song of Songs from the Bible. It is sensual, it is passionate, it is intimate, love poetry. Okay? I used to tell students at ONU that if you read Song of Songs, a little translation to your date, and she doesn't want to stay home with you, she ain't never going to want to. Okay? Just that simple. If you read Rumi, why speak of two, my beloved? In the eyes of the beloved, there's only one. Right? If you read Rumi and it doesn't create intimacy ain't going to be created, is it?
That's right.
And I imagine even more so in the original language. Kabir, Gibran. Who's read Gibran? On love, right? The branches, the true roots should go together. The branches come together, but not so much that they intertwine. Or on pain. Pain is the bitter potion by which the physician within us heals ourselves. There's a reason that mystical poetry by mystics, is always in that language of intimate, passionate, sensual love. And the reason is that's the only words we have in any language that can even come close to the experience of Yichud or Pilgrim. That's why we sing. Because sing of the Nigunim, why we dance. That's an expression of it that's a lot better than the words. Does that make sense to everyone? So when people talk about Kabbalah now, they're talking about Lurianic Kabbalah. They're not talking about deeper levels or why or how. Does that make sense to everyone? It's what I don't teach it that way. It's the old ways. It's organic. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Luria comes up with all of this, and he integrates them. Okay. Now, so you studied about the Sphira. Anyone else learned about the Sphira? These names of the Sphira. Do you remember them or not? Not so much.
Yesod.
Yesod is one, correct? So Keter is the crown. So we have these different names, right? Okay. And they actually come from the Bible, and they actually are said every week when we pull out the Torah. L'cha Adonai hagedula, right? Gedula, same as Chesed. Hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod. Those are all the names, aren't they? He didn't make it up. Then lies Kikol Bashamayim and everything in the heavens. Like Michael Jackson. Oh! Okay. If you've never seen Sammy Davis Jr., a video of Sammy Davis Jr. doing a Michael Jackson impersonation, I recommend you YouTube it. It's hysterically funny. Kikol Bashamayim uva aretz, and in the earth. That's all. Does that make sense to you? That's right there in plain sight, isn't it? Did God make it so difficult, or did we?
We did.
Or let's look at. So Rebecca, you learned about Yesod, and what did you learn about Yesod?
Oh my God, it was before I was married, so that goes back kind of too many years.
Okay, so you learned Yesod means foundation, right? And that Yesod is the sexuality in organs, right? Probably learned something to that effect. Maybe they couched it as creative sexuality or whatever, right? That's not why it's called Yesod. Let me just be clear on that. We're made in the image of what or whom? God. Four-letter name, right? There's your four-letter name. Remember the four-letter names like this?
Adonai.
right? Now it's vertical. What's that look like? It's a person, isn't it? That's how we're made in the image of God. Now, if you looked at this not as a person, but as an architect or an artist, what is the foundation of this structure? It's right there, isn't it? Right? If I erase this, the whole structure is not connected and goes boom.
Collapses.
Right? So what's the foundation of the structure? And that's why it's called Yesod, not because sexuality is the foundation of our life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But in order to understand that, you need to not just learn that this is Yesod, you need to learn where it comes from. By the way, there's another piece. If this is the flow of God, also if this is who we are, what kind of meat can we not eat from a cow? What part of the cow can we not eat?
We're
Specifically?
Sciatic
Because?
Sciatic nerve.
Because it's not kosher. Why is it not kosher?
Angel.
Because Angel wrenches Jacob's
Hip.
hip.
Yeah. Right.
That's right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you eat non-kosher meat, you're closing up that opening.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone? So you want to know a reason to start eating only kosher meat, to explore it? Because kosher meat allows you to have, let's try to get these colors, allows you, right, to have an opening there. To have the flow of God go in and out. Non-kosher meat, zhup, closes that flow.
Huh.
Now, is that Kabbalah?
I never heard that. I mean, I'm not. Yeah. I mean, I what I found was it was kind of a turn off because you learn this thing and there was like no way to apply it to your life, So that was my.
Is that Kabbalah? That's just hidden in plain sight. We just got to receive it. So it's a great question that you ask, is my question. Why does God make it so difficult? God doesn't. God shows us the pathways. We have a book called Sefer Yetzirah, another book called Sefer Yetzirah here. They both go into how the universe is created. They both go into the meanings of letters, the deeper meanings of letters. How if you look at a hey, it's actually a resh and a vav. Right? Because that's the resh and that's the vav. It's all right there. When you make the comment that it seems the language is in code, that's what Sefer Bahir is all about. And that's about 2,000, 2,200 years old. Predates Luria by 1,500 plus years. So someone wants to study Jewish mysticism and understanding of Maaseh Merkavah, how the world, the universe works, and you're not looking at Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Bahir, you're missing the point. You're learning dogma.
Yeah.
We don't like dogma. Dogma is very anti-Jewish. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? It's hidden in plain sight. Luria points a lot of it out. How many of you know the Ve'ahavta prayer? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha u'chol nafshecha u'chol me'odecha. Right? Sound familiar?
Yeah.
The word for heart says you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That's how it's always translated. Except it's wrong. You guys will learn this. It's wrong. The word for heart is lev. Okay. In Hebrew, if I put cha at the end, it means yours. The word for table is shulchan. Shulchan cha means your table. The word for book is sefer. Sefer cha means your book. So the way I should say your heart should be lev cha, shouldn't it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't. It says lev avecha. There's two bets. So either God doesn't know grammar, God stutters, or there's a hidden meaning. What do you guys think? I choose the mean, right? And so our sages teach us because we each have two hearts. A heart for good, a heart for not so. God knows both of them. Say, love me with both of them, like you're saying to your kids. Well, not to your kids. Not to your kids. Okay, but we're saying to our kids, right? I love you, and I know what a shmendrik you are at times. Right? I don't love you in spite of it. It's part of the package. You walk into the kitchen, say, broken cookies on the floor, a broken cookie jar on the floor. Kid's got chocolate chips on his mouth. and you say, who broke the cookie jar? Is it because you don't know? No, it's because you want to deepen the relationship.
If God wants us to love Him with all our heart, why are there 613 laws? Why did He give us laws? If that's all He wants.
Well, first of all, there's 613. 610 are for us, 3 are for them. Okay, they're not obligated to the other ones. You can do them, but you're not obligated. Because first of all, they have an automatic connection with God that you and I will never have.
Creation.
They have the experience of the potential for life and death every adult month, right? But, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a young woman in a world where there weren't an older woman and to suddenly have your first menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
Right? What would you even do with that? And it's devastating for a lot of young women.
Yeah.
So that's the first piece. They can do the other ones, but they're not obligated. Why did you get married? They said, well, someone else asked a rabbi, why do you rabbis answer a question with a question? The rabbi said, do we? So I'm going to answer your question with a question. Why did you get married?
To have a partner in life.
You couldn't have it without having the ketubah and a wedding contract? You couldn't have it with spending all the money on the big wedding?
Those are just traditions.
You didn't have to do it. Why get married? As why?
Yeah, I wanted a partner in life.
And you wanted a deeper level than just saying you're my partner in life.
Correct.
So the rules of marriage did not lessen your relationship. It deepened your relationship. Right? Okay. I met Allison. I knew the night I met her I was going to marry her. I told her that. She thought I just wanted to get lucky. I did. She married me. The next day we found out actually that her grandparents and my parents had been friends. It was a gift to my baby book because they sat on a board together. It's a gift to my baby book.
Oh, wow.
Her grandparents. Okay. I waited about 2 months or so to propose, just so it would be on a date that I would always remember. Honestly, that's why. Look, we can go out for another year and a half, then we can get engaged. We can go out for a year, we can get engaged, spend 6 months planning a wedding, or I can propose to you now. We can propose to her and everything else, and we can get engaged now and spend a year and a half planning the wedding, which should be a lot easier. And there was a truth to that, a very deep and personal and real truth. I got to use all the relationships I had to bring off the fairy tale wedding at my non-fairy tale price. I call it 30 years of relationships. Okay. But there's another reason. I've said this to her. Her engagement ring was my grandmother. It was very close to her. I gave her that ring. Okay? She accepted it. There was no way I was then going to be a schmuck, excuse the expression, and screw around. I put a yoke on myself. I put a boundary on myself so that my love with her could grow deeper. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you all agree that was the right decision?
Yes.
That way I couldn't screw it up.
Yes.
No, I wouldn't screw it up, right? She's got my grandmother's engagement ring. I'm not going to screw this up. And I already said I'm committed. God gives us these commandments not to be chains, to be many ways. Not to be burdens, but to be joys. Does that help a little bit?
It just feels like it's a burden. That's what it feels like.
Okay. But sometimes that's because we don't know what they mean,
Yeah.
how they mean. And we don't know the rules. And we don't know, and this goes back to what we were talking about. We don't know about the true love. So, how many of you have heard we don't drive on Shabbat? Ever heard that? Someone tell me why. Not you two. Someone tell me why. Anyone got an idea?
On the woods on Shabbat and making
Turning on the fire.
Turn a fire. Not if it's a diesel.
Electric.
I have
So,
no
well,
idea.
You're assuming that you're going to go to work if you're driving. You're not.
I have no idea.
I'm assuming
It's not just work. You can't go outside the Eruv right? You can't even take a bicycle or walk outside of a certain area, right?
You're limited in your scope.
Why? This is pretty onerous, doesn't it? That's okay. So the reason we're not supposed to drive on Shabbat is because it says in the Torah that on Shabbat you give your animals rest.
You're right.
And when the car came about, the rabbis had to create a tshuva about it, a response. So what did they create? What were cars called? Horseless carriages. These cars aren't going to catch on. Just treat them like horses, and you can't drive them. Anyone know why roads are as wide as they are? Why railroad tracks are as wide as they are? What goes back to?
Roman chariots.
Roman chariots. Let's keep doing it, right? That. So you need to understand where the root comes from. I have no hamsters in my car. I'll drive on Shabbat. I know that the rabbis say I should. I know it's rabbinic law that I should. But at least for now, I do. How about milk and chicken? Right? It says you can't have milk and meat. Is a chicken a meat?
No,
I don't care how hard you try. You can't milk a chicken, right?
that's right.
Doesn't work. You can try all day to find little nipples and try and squeeze them from milk. It ain't gonna happen, okay? Just in case no one's clear on the animal husbandry. But the rabbis, 1,000 years ago, thought that it would be easy for a Jew who thought he was eating a burnt chicken to actually be eating burnt cow. And so to make sure that they created a fence around the Torah, so chickens counted as meat. I have a friend who keeps block kosher. One exception, he will eat chicken cheese sandwiches and chicken parmesan whenever he can. He says, the heck with the rabbis, I can tell between a cheese, a chicken, and a beef. You need to know where they come from. Does that make sense? And when you understand that, then they become less onerous and more uplifting. 30 years ago, maybe more, I wanted to not 30 years ago, I wanted to do more teaching at the university. So I asked my friend Rabbi Abraham Greenbaum in Jerusalem, I said to him, he's a Cardinals fellow from Cambridge. I said to him, what should I do to do more teaching? I taught part-time at a small college, one class. I really liked it. And he says to me, I think he's been telling me publish here, dude. He says, you need to celebrate and observe the Shabbos. The Shabbos is about taking a day off. And when you make a concerted effort in your physical world to change your spiritual reality, that will manifest a different physical reality. So I decided I was going to observe the ultra Orthodox Shabbos. Okay. The first Saturday, around 1 o'clock, I had Spilkus waiting for the sun to go down. The third or fourth Saturday, now it's like 6, 7 o'clock. Where's the sun? A month and a half into it, I didn't want the sun to go down. I wanted Shabbos to keep going. It's a choice. At first, it may seem like wrapping tefillin is an obligation. It's horrible. Why does it feel like a chain? But when you realize that it actually touches the meridian lines in Chinese healing and changes how your body and your mind and brain are working, when you realize that it's your wedding contract with God, and when you realize that it's betrothing yourself, that everything you do is an expression of God. You're God's hand. It's not an obligation. It's a joy. Does that help a little bit?
Absolutely.
Does that help?
Yeah.
You guys a little bit? So our commentators give us all these laws and understandings, and then we start getting Luria, who starts bringing in a mystical understanding and codification. And with Luria, as we get into Lurianic Kabbalah, we start to have the experiences. He gives us a pathway with which to have experiences. But like any pathway, it's just a pathway, not all pathways, right? It's a pathway. And it becomes so easy to say, I'm going to teach you Kabbalah, And this goes here, and this is that. It has no purpose in the real world. It's dogma. As Reb Zalman Shakti Shalomi of blessed memory used to say, the Kabbalists, the Kabbalologists. These guys can tell you everything about it. These guys experience it. But ultimately, it's about it. It's about God. That's not a hard concept, is it? Hillel says in the Talmud, do not do to anyone else what you do not want them doing to you. That's the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. It's about how we live, and when it becomes distanced from how we live, all it becomes is empty words. And that's probably one of the reasons I don't like Rashi either. Too many people I have experienced can tell you everything that Rashi says, but they can tell you nothing about what Rashi means. Every word. How many guys do we know quote Bible chapter and verse? Right?
Yeah.
But they're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
That's what our commentators start to do. We have this flower. Most in the Sephardic world of those great people I was referring to. Those great commentators. It's really worth exploring. Okay. Next week we're going to get into Jewish mysticism and meditation. Okay. Because otherwise, if it's just words, it's to quote a great Cuban rabbi, it's Mussar. Okay, it's BS. It's not. It's just words. Right? It's trash. And so I think it's important that we all part of that. They go hand in hand. I think it is when I used to teach at American Jewish University, the class was Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Meditation, not Jewish mysticism. Because without this, you don't understand experientially. Yes. Does that make sense to everyone? So we're going to do some Jewish meditation and understanding in a different way. Okay. Again, if we look at just, this center right here is called Tiferet. It's harmony. It's right there. That's the balance place of everything, isn't it? Right, of the structure. That's why it's called harmony. Not because my heart is so beautiful. It just balances and harmonizes everything. Because that's what harmony we find in ourselves. So it's part of the reason I love Shabbat under the stars, because all of this stuff you can experience outside a lot easier. Okay, we do have Shabbat under the stars on Friday. If you haven't registered for high holidays, please do so. Make our lives easier. Make Orlando's life easier. How many registrations are we at? No, we're not at very many. 300, 400, 350. So what ends up happening is we'll end up with our 1,000 plus. It's just 2 weeks beforehand. So if you can do it now, that's just
The last 4 weeks.
yeah. Just so it just makes it easier to do now. I have to pick up the tickets, by the way, so we can stress it. Any questions on any of this stuff? Interesting, helpful, useful? Don't ever do that stuff that has no use. Yes, Al.
Yeah, I want to ask about the Shabbos bride. I'm probably way off, but I got the idea. I don't know where I got it from. I got it from going to Friday night service with you. That
That's great. So you discount. Obviously, you don't like the idea because you're saying it's way off, and you're probably but you got it from me. So go ahead. I'm feeling really empowered right now.
Well, it's a backhanded compliment. Okay. The thing is, it seems that every Friday night, a married couple, in a sense, recommits and goes into almost what you'd call a Friday night honeymoon.
Where you are the groom is commanded, the husband is commanded to make love. And the quote is, they're to have mutual orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
It is the woman's right and the man's responsibility.
I wasn't wrong.
You guys get that? You're loving that right now, aren't you? Yes, I love this religion. Okay.
So I wasn't
And you're
wrong.
going, ain't so bad, actually.
So I wasn't wrong.
Oh. And what do we do before we do that? The traditional Shabbat, there are a couple of things you need to do. Number one is you need to bless your children.
Yeah.
Okay? But then it says the boys were in Allison's womb. Number two, we traditionally read Ashes Chayil. last chapter of the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is a book that's all about how to have ethics in business, how to keep your values. But the entire last chapter of my King Solomon is about your partner, a woman of valor. Beauty is beyond pearls, her value is beyond rubies. No one lacks for her because of her. Look at this kind of stuff. Why? Because it's easy as a husband. Today also as a wife and mother, but easier traditionally as a husband to get lost in commerce. Okay? We talked about that. Your husband every week had told you how fabulous you were.
I'd still be married.
Happily.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's easy to get lost up and forget why we're doing what we're doing in the first place. And so we bless our children, thank our partners. We have in our house every week. I thank Allison, the boys have to kiss mommy, thank you. Because she works her butts off. Her butts got twins. Okay? To thank her. If it's a reminder, think about our Shabbat. Welcome to Sabbath, right? Yeah. We bless our children. Thank our wives. Remember why we're doing this in the first place. And then naturally, it culminates in Yehud with each other.
If more men did this, they'd have happier marriages.
We have a woman who will vouch for that right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay? A woman who vouches because I know her husband every week tells her, hopefully every day, because he's an exceptionally wise man, how fabulous Carolyn is, right?
Graduation aisle every week. In the very literal translation, not the extra translation.
Okay? But you do that. Those are important things, aren't they? It's important things to be blessing your children. They're getting bigger and bigger, right? Daddy, I can't wait till I'm so big you have to bless me standing up. Right? It is unification. As above, so below kind of thing. It's a mirror of the holy unification between the Ruach HaKodesh and Shekhinah, the masculine and feminine spirit of God. The Proverbs.
It goes back to this.
And that's where we get into, and we'll get to that in 2 weeks actually. I don't think we'll get to it next week. But the Hasidic movement of the Baal Shem Tov, who took all of this stuff that often seemed confusing or challenging or like it was chains. Baal Shem Tov brings it back to being the music, storytelling. It's all hidden right there. And that becomes the modern Hasidic.
It's funny, in Kung Fu, we're taught that the focus is here.
It's called the Hara.
Yeah.
Same thing. Same thing. It's all the same thing. All right. So does
No
that
matter what culture you go to, it's all
Doesn't
the
matter.
same.
Doesn't matter. It's true. Just different colors. So, does that, any questions or comments on any of this? Okay. So next week we will, we'll cover each other. And we're going to explore a bit more into experiencing. We just don't pay attention.
Rabbi, I got a new.
So thank you for that. Let's turn this off. Who's taking the charity?